24th of October, 11:53 a.m. The Old Bailey, Defendant's Ante-Chamber. Ah, the Knight Errant himself. Oh, have you been watching from the gallery, Mr. Sholmes? I've been on the edge of my seat the entire time. Courtroom trials are fascinating affairs, as a spectator, at least. I'm glad you've been enjoying yourself. I have to ask. What on earth is going on? It makes no sense. What's this professor business all about? He doesn't look like any professor I've ever met before. Who even is he? Of course. You were in Germany already 10 years ago. Yes, the professor. When I discovered he was the one who had been abducted, a sense of foreboding stirred within me. But who knew the monster would come knocking at your door? My heartfelt sympathies! As it turns out, Lord Van Zieks is even more intimately tied to this case than any of us realized, isn't he? Yes, how true. His great friend from university in the dock. And now a waxwork of the killer who took his esteemed brother's life makes an appearance too. I imagine even the shrewd Mr. Reaper failed to foresee that kick in the teeth. An extraordinary move on your part, my dear fellow, to throw that in front of the man. You make it sound deliberate. I can't help feeling that this professor case is really very puzzling. Ah, yes? In what particular manner? Well, there's Mr. Jabber, Dr. Sithe, and Lord Van Zieks. It seems that everybody in this trial has a link to the case somehow. Yeah. In fact, I alone am not a member of the set. So that leaves me as an empty set, all alone with no intersection to any other. Excuse me, I don't know. It's gonna be either 2 spells or Dr. Sithe, right? Let's say it's 2 spells. Excuse me. Excuse me. Dr. Sithe? Ah, Dr. Courtney Sithe, nay Stevens. Good day to you. Hello, Sholmes. That was very shrewd of you. What in particular, pray? You requested that 10-year-old autopsy report from Gregson, didn't you? Why would you assume such a thing? Because Gregson told me. To think it's been 10 years. 10 years in the laboratory, wielding my scalpel. I smell of nothing but corpses and disinfectant. A policeman on the jury had a lot to say about you, as it happens, Dr. Sithe. And I've accused you of being complicit in what happened. I'm hoping that you'll take the stand and tell the truth about what really happened. That certainly won't be possible. Lord Van Zieks won't be summoning me as a witness. Lord Strongheart has forbidden it. Lord Strongheart? The Pandora's box you have warned about is the Professor case. But please don't make the mistake of thinking you'll get any information about it out of me. But attempting to hide from the truth, that's cowardice. I've always thought crime is a way that I see fit. I have no regrets, none at all. And that's all I came here to say. So, good day to you. She mentioned it too. This Pandora's box. Whatever does it mean? There's really no cause for concern. I assure you, when the trial resumes, their meaning will become all too apparent, whether you'd like it or not. Huh? Now then, I believe it's almost time. I must make my way back to the public gallery. The edge of my seat awaits. I think maybe you're enjoying yourself a little too much. Ah yes, one word of warning before I go. If in the course of the trial this afternoon you perceive even a shadow of doubt about the truth, don't let it out of your sight. Pursue it like a dog with a bone. To the bitter end, you understand. Do not falter, whatever may come to pass. Alright, I understand. Thank you. Good, I shall make myself scarce then. I purchased a bar of caramel earlier, so I shall be gnawing on that as you gnaw away at the truth. What did that warning from Mr. Sholmes really mean, I wonder? Especially the bit about whatever may come to pass. It's time for the final chapter then. I'm determined to find the truth, no matter what. In the name of Her Majesty the Queen, I hereby reconvene the proceedings of this court. Counsels for the defense and prosecution, are you ready and able to continue?
The prosecution is ready, my lord.
Yes, my lord. The defense is also ready. As the court is aware, the case under our scrutiny began with a damaging incident at the Great Exhibition. Yet we now find ourselves embroiled in the details of a convicted felon who was sent to the gallows a decade ago. This trial has certainly defied all expectation.
It seems to be the fate of all trials in which this Nipponese is involved, my lord.
So then, let us begin our exploration of the defense's assertion that the waxwork was cardinally involved in this matter. Lord Van Zieks?
My lord.
Are we still awaiting the arrival of Madame Tuspels?
Not at all. She is in the antechamber as we speak, and ready to be summoned.
Very well. Bring in the witness.
At once, my lord. Bailiff, show Madame Tuspels to the stand.
Things are about to become a lot more intense. If Drebber is responsible, as I'm sure he is, it means he must have had an accomplice in Dr. Scythe. And what connects the pair of them is the waxwork. Yes, the model of the professor. That's the key to the link between these otherwise unrelated individuals. It's a tenuous link, admittedly, but at present, it's all we have to go on.
State your name and occupation for the court, please.
My name is Madame Esmeralda Tuspels. I am a waxwork artisan, and the proprietors of the Madame Tuspels Museum of Waxwork. You will have to pardon me for working as I testify. My new exhibit must open very soon.
Oh, so he finally gets a statue, does he? Now there are two of them in the world? Oh my, what expression is she carving onto that face?
A number of days ago, a particular waxwork model was stolen from your museum. Can you confirm this?
Oui, that is true. At first, we believed it had been kidnapped.
A waxwork model? Kidnapped?
Oui, my lord. There was a demand for ransom money left behind by the culprit. However, according to what I have just been told outside the courtroom, that was not the true reason. I understand it was utilized as a substitute for the body of a murder victim.
At present, that is no more than conjecture proposed by the defense. This is the victim of the case in question, Mr. O.D. Asman.
But of course, I know him well. He is a part of my odious personages exhibit. I detest to say what is evident, but Mr. Asman does not resemble the professor at all.
Yeah, but perhaps their faces are very similar.
Are you suggesting that we should see now the demasked visage of the professor? I have here the key, but it is strictly forbidden to open the lock.
This is absurd.
Pardon?
I don't know what face you've carved onto your fancy figure beneath that mask. But clearly it won't be that of the actual killer.
Indeed. The man's identity was never made public, after all.
The trial took place in a closed court. The proceedings were strictly confidential. The condemned man was summarily executed. His identity remains a closely guarded national secret. There is no possible way that a repository of a tawdry exhibit... There's no possible way that a repository of tawdry exhibits could get its hands on that information.
Quail de Moy. It would seem you are unaware of the two spells' principles.
What principles?
The family two spells have always prided itself on sculpting its models à la perfection. Every detail, including the visage, is fashioned with complete fidelity. It were our principles.
There is a well-known legend about the two spells waxwork from the time of the French Revolution. A member of the two spells family is said to have made a waxwork of the queen who was executed.
Oui, that is true. It was a century ago now.
I believe the queen's face was carved in the minutes following her death, actually, at the guillotine site.
You are correct. The model on display is still today in the House of Horrors. We two spells will stop at nothing to obtain a faithful replica of our subjects. Dear me, a somewhat disturbing tenacity of purpose. It is the only way to obtain a truly lifelike representation of the subject. And it has been my family's secret for generations.
Do you mean to say that beneath that mask...
Oui, the true visage of the killer is there.
This is ludicrous. It's out of the question. The professor
spread terror throughout Great Britain. As a result, the Madame Tussauds special exhibit remains extremely popular even today. The killer emerging from his own grave, it is a sight to behold. You should come.
I think, madam, it would be beneficial to hear your formal testimony on this matter. You will explain every detail of this macabre model and your personal involvement in its creation.
With pleasure.
Alright. Interesting.
The special exhibit in the House of Horrors is based on a rumor that shocked society in London. An impression of the visage was taken directly from the corpse, in accordance with Tussauds' family principles. I enlisted the aid of the gravedigger and created a mold for the head in the cemetery just before the interment. I hid myself until he gave me a signal. I was there for a very long time that night. As dawn approached, I was very worried that I could be discovered.
The gravedigger? The man sanctioned this?
Oui, I will do all that is necessary to achieve the true resemblance my family is celebrated for. Nobody else knew, only the gravedigger. What harm did it do, huh?
So you truly saw it? The face of that monster?
Naturally, I was aware at the time that his identity was a secret. But Tussauds would not be Tussauds if we did not insist on absolute fidelity to our sculptures.
I don't believe this.
I myself have seen the special exhibit at your museum, madam. A truly blood-curdling scene in which the murderer is emerging from his own grave.
The scene it depicts was the subject of many rumors in London 10 years ago. I have here a newspaper from the time. The special exhibit was based upon the picture in this article. It was the most detailed account of what happened, as reported by the eyewitness who saw it.
Yeah.
Man rises from the grave. It's too absurd for words.
The public enjoy absurdity, monsieur. That is why I have reproduced the scene as carefully as possible in my museum.
And it's a waxwork from that exhibit that was stolen some days before the incident at the Great Exhibition, wasn't it?
That is correct. The professor you see before you here.
Most puzzling. Counsel for the defense, proceed with the cross-examination. This waxwork links Drebber to Dr. Scythe, and there has to be some reason for that, which hasn't yet come to light. But I'll find it. I'll get to the bottom of what really happened. I'll prove that Dr. Scythe and Drebber were in on this crime together. Well, the clue has to be in the newspaper, right? Let's see. What's in that newspaper, huh? Oh, okay. Man rises from the grave. Executed criminal returns in the dead of night at local cemetery. At Lowgate Cemetery, just behind the prison, on the night of that foul demon's execution, the newly entered professor forced off his grave cover as he clawed free of the earth. The young man who witnessed this scene was on the verge of raising a shriek. Denly from behind, the bullet pierced the resurrected man's chest, whose breath then stilled once more. The youth then finally released the scream he had been holding and ran for his life. The university student who experienced this shocking event is Mr. Enoch Drebber, a disciple of science at the University of London and a resident of its student dorms. Signed Odie Asman. Interesting. Okay. But no connection between Drebber and Scythe yet. So interesting. But that proves that, well, anyway, we'll leave it for later. Okay.
The special exhibit in the House of Ours is based on a rumor that shocked society in London.
And that rumor would be
a 10-year-old tale now, but one that no Londoner would ever forget.
Ah, right. I know just what you're talking about, I think. Of course, it couldn't be anything else. Yes, that story will never disappear.
The tale of the condemned killer rising from the dead. That is the central attraction of my House of Ours. The rumor was whispered all over the city, and it was like this. It was in Lowgate Cemetery behind the prison, in the dead of night after the execution of the killer. The entered professor slid back the stone slab covering his tomb and emerged from his grave. A young man who witnessed this felt a scream welling up inside him. But an instant later, he heard an ear-splitting gunshot from over his shoulder. The bullet struck the emerging corpse, and he fell motionless once more. The scream finally found its way from the mouth of the young witness, who turned and ran for his life.
Right. The corpse climbed out of his own grave? And then somebody shot him? Who? Who was it?
Nobody knows, even today. But remember, it was just a rumor, perhaps nothing more than a ghost story. The good people of London, they love stories like this. That is why it was in every newspaper across the capital.
But was it just a story? I mean, this is exactly the scene that can be seen today at your museum, isn't it?
Oui, the special exhibit was modeled on that very illustration. For a while afterwards, the contents of that article were reproduced in every newspaper imaginable.
But, might I say something?
Please, go ahead, mademoiselle.
When something is described as a rumor, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's entirely made up. I believe that often, rumors contain elements of the truth.
Ah, I see that people from the East can be just as astute as the people of Europe.
Can we be sure, for instance, that the professor's execution was successful?
It is not possible for the dead to come back to life.
Sorry?
10 years ago, I was there in Logate Cemetery. After the criminal known as the Professor was killed by hanging, I took a wax impression of his visage from the corpse just before it was interred. So I can assure you, the man was dead.
I see. It would certainly appear that the condemned man suffered the intended fate.
An impression of the visage was taken directly from the corpse, in accordance with Tuspel's family principle.
Is that true of every waxwork in your museum, then?
It is, assuming the subject is dead, of course. Live subjects have to cooperate in a similar way. I have letters from imprisoned criminals all the time, you know.
What sort of letters?
When my time comes, please make a waxwork of me. Komeka.
No.
My museum is famous, monsieur. To be made into a waxwork is an honor, and for some criminals, a symbol of status even.
Because nothing says hardened criminal better than wax.
And it is thanks to one killer in particular that my museum has gained such popularity in London. I refer to the star of the special exhibit, of course, the Professor.
Whose form you claim to have captured by taking an impression from the actual corpse.
There are no exceptions to the principles of two spells. I enlisted the aid of the gravedigger and created a mold for the head in the cemetery just before the interment.
Surely that's illegal, isn't it?
It would seem the proprietors of this repository of novelties was blinded by monetary greed.
It had nothing to do with money. The man is part of London's criminal history. That is why I had to scout him to record his history. It is the raison d'etre of the Tuspel's museum.
But if the man was convicted in a closed court and sent for immediate execution, then surely nobody but the members of the judiciary present know the killer's true identity.
I assure you, behind that mask is hidden the true face of the Professor.
Do you realize what you're saying? The Professor's identity is a national secret.
I understand. And now that the truth about the special exhibit has been revealed, it must perhaps close.
Of course it will. As will your entire museum if you don't tread very carefully, madam.
That could be another interesting chapter in the history of my family, I think, don't you?
So 10 years ago, on the night of the professor's execution, you took a wax impression of his face from the corpse.
Oui, exactement. I hid myself until he gave me a signal. I was there for a very long time that night.
You were there longer than you expected to be?
I had some difficulties in capturing the subject's form correctly. As I removed the mask, the mouth of the
cadaver fell open and I had some problems with the chin.
Dare I ask?
The man had been dead for a short while already, you see. His muscles were relaxing and consequently his chin would not align itself correctly.
Oh dear, what a horrible thought.
Under normal circumstances, I would have an assistant with me. However, that night I was alone, and as a consequence, I missed my preferred window of time.
What do you mean?
When I take the impression of the visage of a cadaver, I always wait until 3 hours after death.
Why 3 hours? Is that amount of time significant?
It is because of rigor mortis.
Rigor mortis?
It is the name given to a phenomenon that occurs in recently deceased bodies. As a rule, 3 hours post-death, the muscles in the body begin to stiffen. By approximately 10 hours post-death, the entire body is completely rigid and inflexible. And then from that point on, the muscles slowly start to revert to their relaxed state. The effect is often used to estimate the time of death when a body is discovered.
Well, that was an education, if a slightly scary one.
As the mademoiselle says, rigor mortis commences 3 hours after death, and it starts in the jaw. I see, so that's why you wait. Before that time, the mouth falls open, and it's very difficult to do my work.
Oh, it's getting hard for me to do my work with all this talk of corpses. I wonder about that information the court just heard from Madame Tispels. Sure. The information about rigor mortis that you just shared with us, would you mind including it in your formal testimony? I believe it could be significant, you see.
Of course, I do not mind at all.
I can't help feeling that after this latest topic, the atmosphere in the courtroom has become extremely grave. This is no time for jokes, Mr. Sato.
Madam, kindly amend your testimony as discussed.
Bien sûr. It took me a very long time because it was before the onset of rigor mortis.
Rigor mortis being the phenomenon you described whereby the corpse becomes stiff after death. I think you said that it starts at the jaw about 3 hours post-death. Is that right?
Oui, c'est ça. C'est ça. The exact duration depends a little on the season.
I didn't realize a waxwork artist would be so well versed in the subject.
None. That is only elementary knowledge in the field of legal medicine.
Well, I had no idea about it, but maybe I won't admit to my ignorance about forensic science. I could ask my father to give you a very simple primer if you like. I think corpses should be your domain. I'm not good with them.
Oh dear, I'll do my very best. As dawn approached, I was very worried that I could be discovered.
You say that dawn was approaching. What was the time of day then, approximately?
Well, I could not say, but when I left the cemetery with my utensils and wax, the morning light was becoming visible. The execution took place on 17th of June, which had the earliest sunrise of that year.
Indeed. The first light would have been at around 4:40 in the morning. That really is early.
The fact is, I had very little time, so I finished my work in half an hour. It was necessary to complete the impression and bury the body before daybreak, of course. If somebody had discovered me there, it would have been a catastrophe, so I had to hurry.
Is it me, or does Mr. Sholmes seem to be taking shape more quickly now, too?
You certainly appear to go to extraordinary lengths for your work, madam.
I wonder, is what she just said particularly significant? Sure, why not? Madam, those details about how long it took you to complete the sculpture and the early sunrise, could you include them in your testimony? I believe they may be significant.
Of course, if you would like me to.
You're quite right, Mr. Naruhodo. It is intriguing. A sunrise at 4 in the morning would be absolutely unimaginable at home, wouldn't it? That's not quite what I meant by significant. Kindly amend your formal testimony then, madam.
With pleasure, my lord. I ought to finish my work in the half hour before sunrise. Then I left as soon as the corpse was interred.
Hold it!
Did you have reason to believe you might be discovered once the sun came up or something?
I had paid the grave digger money to keep my little secret, of course. But with the morning light, I knew that the warden from the prison would commence his patrol of the area.
Couldn't you just have paid off the warden too then?
I had already paid the grave digger, as I said. You cannot buy the silence of everyone, or the secret is no longer a secret, huh? The sunrise was at 4:40 a.m. that day, which means that it would have been around 4 when you began your sculpting work. Oui, that must be correct. That would be when the grave digger gave me the signal to come out of hiding.
So, that's all I have to go on? What is your feeling, Mr. Naruhodo? For some reason, Dr. Scythe went along with Drubber's plan. Now, if that's really true, then the professor is the only other thing we know of that links the pair of them. So I feel sure that waxwork must be a clue to this mystery somehow. In that case, we must use this cross-examination to uncover exactly what it means. Otherwise, the jurors are sure to revert their leanings and the trial will be over. I agree, but interestingly, uncovering what the professor has to do with all of this means more to Lord Van Zeeks than anyone. That's the impression I'm getting anyway.
Yes, as do I.
After all, he has a profound connection to the professor as well. Alright, when was he executed? Let's see. Midnight. So, between 12 and 4. She started at 4. If she started at 4 and the corpse and the guy, the professor, was executed at 12, then it was more than 3 hours. So,
Objection!
Madam Tuspels, I have here an autopsy report that was filed 10 years ago now. It confirms the death of the professor following his execution at the gallows.
And is that a problem?
I believe it is, because your testimony and a particular detail in the report completely contradict one another.
Quoi? Are you going to explain yourself, my Nipponese friend?
According to her testimony, Madame Tuspels was creating her waxwork impression just before dawn, and at that time, rigor mortis had not yet set in. Am I correct so far, madam?
Yes. As I said, the stiffening of the jaw is the first sign of rigor mortis, 2 to 3 hours after death. But the man's skin was limp, so he could not have been dead for a long time.
But on the other hand, if you look at Dr. Scythe's report, it quite clearly states the following. Death by hanging confirmed at midnight, 17th of June.
No!
If the professor indeed died at midnight that day, then by the time you were sculpting his face, rigor mortis would already have set in.
Oui, yes, you're right. The chin, it would have been completely stiff.
In other words, this report is wrong.
Objection!
No coroner makes mistakes when recording the time of death. The very idea is absurd.
In that case, there is only one possible conclusion. The execution didn't actually take place at the stated time.
Impossible!
Order! Counsel, this is beyond folly. Not only do you induct the author of the report, Dr. Sithe, but you also implicate members of staff at Barclay Prison where the execution took place. By heck, extraordinary! Not in my day.
My learned friend appears to have overlooked one very crucial fact.
What fact?
The professor died that night, without question.
He did. Of course he did.
I moved the man's limp jaw with my own hands. There was no...
Yeah, the professor died that night. But what if he didn't die at the gallows?
Didn't die at... Are you insane? What exactly are you suggesting did happen in that case?
It's almost impossible to believe, but it would explain the link between Dr. Sithe, the professor, and that one other person of interest. I have evidence that will explain exactly what I'm suggesting happened that night. Counsel, present the evidence at once. The evidence that allegedly explains what really happened on the night of the professor's execution.
Take that!
What happened that night is written very plainly in this newspaper article. Executed criminal returns in the dead of night at local cemetery.
You're suggesting it was a corpse coming back from the dead now?
Well, if this article is to be believed, yes. The professor, assumed dead following his execution, emerged from his grave and was killed again.
Objection!
Don't be a fool. That is simply a rumor published by the Gata Press.
Can you be certain of that?
Are you serious?
The point is, as the article says, there was a witness to what happened.
My word, yes, indeed. Mais oui, the young man who stole into the cemetery by chance that night.
Objection!
Of course there was a witness. The story didn't write itself, but obviously the man made it all up.
And in any case, this was 10 years ago now. There would surely be no hope of finding him. On the contrary, my lord, we all know this witness well.
What?
Are you suggesting, Counsel, that you have identified the person in question? That you know who claims to have seen these utterly incredible events take place? Yes, my lord. In fact, you could say that he's right here before my very eyes. You will substantiate your latest claim now, then, Counsel? Who is this alleged witness of this staggering scene from the cemetery 10 years ago?
Take that!
The man in question is Mr. Enoch Drebber.
Drebber?
The previous witness? The special exhibit in the House of Horrors at Madame Tuspel's Museum of Waxwork recreates that decade-old scene in great detail. The condemned criminal emerging from the grave, and beside the tomb, a young man with a lantern stumbling upon the terrifying sight. And that young man is a 10-year younger Mr. Enoch Drebber. Order! 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 Surely not, Counsel.
Drebber was there in Lowgate Cemetery.
What is this all talk about, Mr. Drebber? Is the name significant?
Of course, Madame Tuspel doesn't know, does she? Yes, it's extremely significant, madam. To your situation as well, in fact.
What situation?
The theft of the Professor Waxwork from your museum some days ago was perpetrated by the very same man.
None! But that would mean...
Madame Tuspels, it would appear you know the name Enoch Drebber.
Oui, I know it, but from long ago in the past.
What? Oh my! Good gracious!
Explain yourself. Tell us everything you know.
Oui, of course. The story of the Ant Man as the terrible sight he witnessed in the cemetery 10 years ago was published in every single newspaper in London and throughout Great Britain. However, in all of the articles, the witness was simply described as a certain young man. No details were published about his identity. His name was never revealed. That is, apart from in one newspaper. The Daily Circus. It is the paper from which comes the article I have already shown the court.
You're saying that his full name was only publicized in that article?
Goodness me, yes, here it is. The university student who experienced this shocking event is Mr. Enoch Trevor, a disciple of science at the University of London and the resident of its student dorms.
Unbelievable.
When I read the article, I went to meet with the man. His discovery of the condemned criminal coming back to life in the cemetery in the dead of night would make a perfect exhibit for my House of Horrors, whether it was the truth or not.
I see. So you went to meet Mr. Jabba in order to sculpt the waxwork of the man, did you?
Exactement. He was studying science at the University of London in those days. He was just a pro student. I paid him £5 to model for the waxwork. And since that time, it has been in my museum to recreate the scene of terror from the cemetery.
So, 10 years ago, a young man appealed to the public about an extraordinary event he'd witnessed. A criminal who had been put to death, re-emerging from his grave in the middle of night. But the public treated his claim as nothing more than an amusing anecdote, that was soon forgotten. 10 years later, the same man steals a waxwork model of the executed criminal, ostensibly to use as a body double for the victim in the case we're discussing here today. Even though the waxwork's build is a poor match for the victim, and its face is obscured by a mask. So the question is, why would the man do such a thing? Which brings us to 3 days ago, when the birdcage crashed into the Crystal Tower. If the birdcage had in fact contained not the body of Mr. Asman, but that same waxwork, the coroner from Scotland Yard who investigated Dr. Sithe would have noticed immediately. And yet, she submitted this autopsy report for the victim, which the court has seen earlier. Why?
Because the waxwork was that of the professor. Is that what you're saying?
Dr. Sithe put her name to a document confirming the death of a condemned criminal who was still alive. A criminal whose apparent resurrection was witnessed by Mr. Drebber. But that misconduct was a deadly secret the coroner would do anything to protect. Which is precisely why Mr. Drebber used that particular waxwork as the body double.
Ah!
My lord, this court must summon Dr. Sithe to the stand. The defense is determined to find out exactly how the coroner and Mr. Drebber are connected.
But according to the missive I received this morning through the prosecutor's office, Dr. Sithe is unable to participate in these proceedings. Is that not the case?
She told us so herself, didn't she?
Lord Van Zieks won't be summoning me as a witness. Lord Strongheart has forbidden it.
Lord Strongheart?
The Pandora's box you ever warned about is the Professor case. But please don't make the mistake of thinking you'll get any information about it out of me.
Something happened on the night of that killer's execution 10 years ago, and surely nobody would want to get to the bottom of that more than Lord Van Zieks.
The prosecution calls for the instructions in that missive to be scrapped.
But Lord Van Zeeks, the missive was issued from the Lord Chief Justice's office.
Objection!
The assigned prosecutor has the final say on policy in any particular trial. In other words, me.
Yes.
Let Enoch Drebber and Dr. Scythe both take the stand together.
Order! 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 Very well, I will uphold your request. Bailiff, send a subpoena with immediate effect addressed to Dr. Scythe of the Forensic Investigation Team. The woman is compelled to attend on Her Majesty's orders. Alright then, Enoch Drebber and Dr. Scythe. If they weren't colluding with one another, this crime could never have been committed. I'm just a stone's throw away. I can feel it. The truth behind all of this is about to come out.
Thank you for your attendance at such short notice, Dr. Scythe.
I am disappointed in you, Lord Van Zeeks. You have completely betrayed the agreed policy of both Scotland Yard and the prosecutor's office.
Betrayal is not in my nature, as long as the truth isn't compromised. If it is, if there's even a hint of wrongdoing, so no matter whom it concerns or disgruntles, I will pursue the matter to the bitter end, as would any prosecutor worth his salt.
Mr. Drebber, you took the victim's life by means of a machine that you constructed in your workshop. And Dr. Scythe, as the investigating coroner, you were the first on the scene to examine the victim's body. It is the belief of the defense that you collaborated with each other and were both complicit in this crime. And where is your evidence? At present, we have no definitive evidence, but we do have a very significant clue. What are you talking about? I'm talking, of course, about the waxwork. This model of the killer known as the Professor, who was sentenced to death 10 years ago. You don't need to tell me. I've witnessed the man's execution with my own eyes and officially pronounced him dead. That remains to be seen. Is that so? According to newspaper reports from the time, on the night following his execution, the killer came back to life. Don't waste my time. And the sole witness to that mysterious event was you, Mr. Drebber, wasn't it? If what you saw in the graveyard that night 10 years ago wasn't some chilling fiction, but reality, it would make you privy to a very great secret of Dr. Scythe's. A secret so profound it could compel the coroner to agree to collaborate in your evil scheme, in fact. Mr. Drebber, tell the court. Tell everyone the truth of what you saw that night in Lowgate Cemetery.
So he was the student who saw it.
You can see the resemblance actually, can't you? With the man in Madame Tussauds, I mean.
Surely he's not going to claim that's really what he saw, especially not after all those years.
He was a research student at the University of London, was he?
And a bit too clever for his own good, if you ask me. What an interesting twist. When at the time, not one person would take me seriously. Yet now here we are, 10 years later, and suddenly my story matters, and in a court of law too. Very well then, if everyone so wishes. Let's be frank, I'll tell you the truth of what happened that night, for what it's worth.
So, Mr. Drebber, your testimony please, about the events of that night 10 years ago. You will tell the court exactly what you stumbled across in Lovegate Cemetery.
Yes, of course, as you wish. The reason I was in Lowgate Cemetery at all 10 years ago was for a spot of moonlighting, shall we say. Yes, the illustration in that newspaper article was based on what I witnessed that night. But thinking back now, I realize that I never actually saw the professor. Soon afterwards, I was visited by a young woman who sculpted a model of me from wax. Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of that newspaper article.
Wait a minute. You're claiming you didn't actually see the professor now?
Of course, you'd have to have a screw loose if you believed the corpse would come back from the dead.
But so you're saying this article is
Not worth the paper it's printed on? I think that would describe it perfectly, yes.
Oh! If the details in the article aren't true, it nullifies your argument for why Mr. Drebber and Dr. Scythe would have been working together. So he's just discrediting himself to cripple my argument? Tell me, witness. You claim to have been in the cemetery on some auxiliary business. Can you elaborate?
That's right, grave robbering to be precise. As you know, Lowgate Cemetery is at the rear of Barclay Prison. So among students at the university, it had a reputation for being haunted by the ghosts of condemned convicts.
Grave robbing, you say?
Yes, exhuming fresh corpses to sell is reasonably lucrative. Of course, I never laid a finger on any valuables buried with the dead.
So you've one of the so-called resurrectionists, a particularly unpleasant scourge on society.
Actually, my fellows and I went by another name. The Repurposers.
That is quite beyond the pale. You would have had divine retribution, sir.
Yes, well, I think I suffered retribution enough. The Daily Circus eventually unearthed my name and put it in print. It caused me a great many headaches. In the end, I had to leave the university. That was the only paper with the bad grace to identify me unambiguously, I might add.
I see.
Out of interest, who chose the illustration for this article?
Ah yes, that was the reporter who exposed me. He sketched that right in front of me as I described the scene.
Oh, really?
Obviously, as time ticked on, I bitterly regretted what I'd done, claiming to have seen something I never truly saw. Foolish. Very foolish.
Well, counsel for the defense, you may proceed to the cross-examination now. At once, my lord. Well, looks like we found the connection. Or the motive, at least. The reporter who disclosed his name to the public is the victim in this case. Isn't that interesting?
The reason I was in Lowgate Cemetery at all 10 years ago was for a spot of moonlighting, shall we say.
By moonlighting, you mean grave robbing, do you?
Surely you only need to look at the graveyard scene and my appearance to gauge the answer to that.
The lantern and spade. But who on earth would want to buy a dead body? Any major hospital? A hospital? In order to better understand the human body, the study of anatomy is crucial to medical science. But there isn't a hospital in the world that has enough specimens to work with. Though obviously they can't openly express an interest in obtaining more by dubious means.
As aspiring scientists, We young research students had no money to work with, as I'm sure you can imagine. So we made surreptitious arrangements with a hospital via some of our medical student acquaintances. We would never take anything of value from the graves. This was all for the furtherance of science, you see. That's what we all told ourselves every time we stole into that graveyard at night, spade in hand.
You realize body snatching is a serious crime.
If you were caught, you could expect the gravest of consequences. We students were caught between the hammer and the anvil. We needed funds for research.
Professor Hairbrain said exactly the same. I'm quite speechless at the apparent levity with which you've revealed this abhorrent behavior.
Well, if you wanted to know why I was there at Lowgate Cemetery, that is the reason. But I never expected it to end the way it did. That I regret to this day.
Right.
Yes, the illustration in that newspaper article was based on what I witnessed that night.
Hold it!
The strange happenings at Lowgate Cemetery, which you now deny.
Not entirely. I ran to fetch the police at the time, you know. I was shaking like a leaf. But they didn't believe a word in it. In fact, I was very nearly arrested myself.
So you went to the papers instead.
I started big with the London News, but unsurprisingly, they didn't want to know either. In the end, though, it was reporters from the gossip rags, the gutter press, that came to get my story. And it spread like the plague through the capital as gossip-hungry Londoners lapped up the table.
The story was in every single newspaper at the time, with the exception of some broadsheets.
And yet only 2 or 3 of them actually interviewed me personally. Most of the accounts turned out to be very interpretive ghost stories.
What about the article in the Daily Circus?
That particular journalist found me at my dormitory. I don't know how, but he discovered my name, so I recounted to him exactly what had happened that night.
And from your description, he drew this illustration.
Precisely. That's how I learned that the condemned man was the infamous professor. Because the reporter told me so. I had no idea myself, you see.
Newspaper reporters are wont to snoop around in matters that don't concern them. So the scene portrayed in the illustration is accurate then?
Well, thinking back now, I realized that I never actually saw the professor at all, though.
Hold it!
What are you talking about?
I think I explained already, didn't I? Lowgate Cemetery is at the rear of Barclay Prison, so it was renowned among us students at the university for being haunted by the ghosts of condemned convicts. For some absurd reason, I was scared of the graveyard at night, and as a result, only too willing to believe that nonsense about the dead coming back to life.
But you said you actually saw it.
I said what I'd seen in my mind's eye. After all, resurrection is impossible, isn't it? You'd have to be unhinged to think otherwise. Unless, of course, you have some evidence that proves I encountered the professor that night.
I don't know. Is there any material evidence that could show he really did see the professor? If we have anything at all, Mr. Naruhodo, I know. I need to present it against that irritatingly backtracking statement of his.
The point is, that night was a pivotal moment in my life. Soon afterwards, I was visited by a young woman who sculpted a model for me. Of me from wax.
Hold it!
That young woman being Madame Two Spells, of course.
Precisely, I must say. I didn't expect to run into her again like this 10 years later.
As I have explained, I went by the name published in the article, and comical, I found the name. I found the man.
Yeah, the article in the Daily Circus, I think you said.
I was a poor student with barely a penny to my name at the time. And the young lady put £5 in front of me. So you readily consented to having a wax work of yourself made and gave permission for it to be put on display. I did. I should sell what little I had to sell, I concluded.
Ah, oui, I remember now. I purchased something else from you that day, n'est-ce pas?
Did you? I can't say I remember.
What was it, madam?
His camera.
Ah,
Oh yes, I made a point of taking it with me whenever I made an excursion into any cemetery.
you took a camera with you, sir? To what end?
To record the details of the bodies I disinterred. But I had no intention of ever visiting a graveyard again after that night, so I sold it.
I see.
But I still have it, monsieur. It is part of the special exhibit in my house of horrors. I am very meticulous about such details. It is the Tuspel's way.
It would seem, then, that this is the very camera Mr. Drebber took with him to Lowgate Cemetery on the night in question. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting.
Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of that newspaper article.
Hold it!
This article, you mean? Published in the Daily Circus?
Yes, somebody informed the dean that it was my name that appeared in the article, and carelessly let slip that night after night. I was digging up graves. Hardly a model student, you might say. The university's reputation was execrably defiled, and I was expelled as a result.
Mon Dieu, I had no idea.
And having been run out of university, you found employment in a somewhat specialist trade.
You combined your knowledge of science with your knowledge of stage magic to create various experimental machines intended to demonstrate never-before-seen technology. And you used those deceptive machines to trick the government and private investors into giving you money. Professor Albert Hairbrand was just your latest victim, wasn't he?
Whatever are you talking about? I have no recollection of doing anything of the sort.
What's Rubber up to? Why would he suddenly change his tune and recant his claim? I wonder if perhaps it's because his circumstances have changed now. What circumstances? Well, if he admits to having seen the professor emerging alive from his grave 10 years ago, it will expose a secret in Dr. Sithe's past that she would desperately want to hide. Yeah, of course. If Jabber and Dr. Sithe are working together now, then if Jabber were to betray her, there would be no reason for her to continue to cooperate. In that case, there's only one way around it. I'll have to prove he really did see it. Prove he really did see the professor's corpse coming back from the dead as he originally claimed. Yes, Mr. Naruhodo, exactly. Alright, So...
Objection!
Okay. It was just... Okay. It was just a guess. Just throwing a Hail Mary. Seeing what sticks. Okay. So how do we prove that he actually did see the corpse, the professor. Let's see. Crossbow? No. Picture of the victim? No. Autopsy, screwdriver, balloon, broken glass, trophy, head, autopsy report. How do we prove that... How do we prove that Drebber saw the professor that day? Can we say that because he stole the waxwork, he knows what the professor... I mean, no, that's... No, I don't know. It's gotta be something else. Just can't put my finger on it. Oh, okay, yeah, there we go. I was thinking, like, the mask, but, okay, I was a little bit far off. Alright. Right. It's not, it doesn't really look like a mask here, it looks like a zombie. So, yeah. If this is a recreation of his retelling of events, and he described the mask, then he obviously must know that what the professor looks like.
Objection.
There we go. Sorry, Mr. Drebber, but I don't believe that.
Don't believe what?
Your latest claim. You did see the professor on that night 10 years ago.
No, dear. We seem to be at odds. But I was there, and you were not. I know what I didn't see.
The illustration with this article was drawn based upon what you told the journalists that you witnessed. A figure emerging from a tomb wearing an iron mask.
But yes, when the killer was tried 10 years ago, it was decided in the closed court ruling that the man would wear the mask to hide his identity. It wasn't to be removed even during his execution and subsequent burial. Not even the prison wardens were to see the man's face. But obviously, the provision of this mask was not public knowledge. So, Mr. Drebber, as you've just heard, a lowly student of the University of London certainly wouldn't have known about the condemned man's mask. So unless he'd actually seen the professor that night, it's inconceivable that the artist would have included the mask in that illustration. Order! Order! Well, Mr. Drebber? it is a vile scene, isn't it, if you look closely? And as I've already been at pains to point out, I was utterly petrified, which is why I had it in my head that I'd seen such a blood-curdling sight. But afterwards I came to my senses and realized that I'd been mistaken.
You're still saying you didn't see it?
If you're stubbornly sticking to that story with this, then amend your testimony to explain exactly how you think your eyes deceived you. Of course, only too happy to oblige.
I can't believe he's still not going to concede the point. Alright, let's hear it.
What I in fact witnessed was a fellow grave robber at work.
Oh, and he's wearing a mask? A fellow grave robber? What are you talking about?
Well, I wasn't the only one busy in the cemetery that night, you know. Other body snatchers were at work. Of course, when I saw one emerging from the hole he'd dug, my heart very nearly stopped. So that's the terrifying sight I actually saw, you see. You're claiming it was just another student on equally insalubrious business as yourself. Many of the medical students would wear metal masks to protect them from bacteria during dissections. Clearly the fellow was using such a mask to protect his anonymity. Wouldn't you say?
Objection.
But there's more to the story, isn't there? The article goes on to say, In the next second, a gunshot rang out suddenly from behind. The bullet pierced the resurrected man's chest, whose breath then stilled once more. We might assume that the sexton discovered the miscreant at work, perhaps, and fired upon one of them. If a gravedigger had shot someone in the cemetery, I think it might have been rather big news, my lord. Ah, yes, well, I can only assume it was an embellishment bolted on later by the reporter.
Excuse me.
Madame Tispels? Don't take it out on Mr. Sholmes.
Ooh la la, pardon. I was lost in my thoughts.
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Drebber's last remark was significant to you in some way?
I thought it was a little strange, that is all. How Monsieur Drebber could claim this now?
If you don't mind me saying, madam, what are you talking about?
Well, when I met you 10 years ago at your university dormitory, you recounted to me about your adventures in the cemetery, no? Including the gunshot?
Stop! You might want to watch your tongue, you know.
Objection.
Have a care, Drebber. There's no way to speak to a lady.
Please, Madame Tispels. Carry on.
Of course. According to what Monsieur Drebber told me at the time, he did hear a gunshot from behind him, and the bullet hit the condemned man.
I said nothing of the sort.
No, you were very explicit about the details. About the mask that the figure was wearing, and the blood that spattered over you when you was shot.
Enough! Shut up, woman! You're making all this up!
That will do. Mr. Drebber,
Yes?
you refute the account just given by Madame Tispels?
I have no recollection of ever saying those things.
Come on, do you really expect us to believe you? Control yourself, counsel. I will not permit baseless accusations in my courtroom. Right. Under the circumstances, I think it best that you supplement your testimony with a statement to clarify your position on this witness.
Oh, very well. There was no gunshot from behind me at all, nor any spattering blood.
Hold it.
Yet Madame Tispels has testified that you told her about both of those details.
Not true. I said nothing of the sort. 10 years have passed. With that material evidence to the contrary, you have no grounds on which to question the witness's word.
Tell me, Madame Tispels,
We?
what exactly did Mr. Drebber say about the blood that apparently spattered on him?
Oh, that is what he told me. All of a sudden, he heard a very loud gunshot from behind his back. The bullet hit the figure who was emerging from the tomb in the middle of the chest, in his heart.
One dreadful shot after another.
And since Monsieur Drebber was at the time facing towards the condemned man, the blood spread from the wound and spattered on his body. That is what he told me.
So, not an experience you would ever forget, is it?
Precisely, and I didn't forget it, because, as I've already said, it never happened in the first place.
He's clearly lying. If only I had some evidence to prove it. Sorry. We can't let him win, Mr. Naruhodo. So we mustn't overlook a single detail, no matter how small. Yeah, this one is easy. This one is very easy. There we go, and...
Objection.
there we go. Mr. Drebber, do you remember this camera?
But that is the camera from that fateful night.
Yeah, we borrowed it from the House of Horrors. It's the camera you took with you to the cemetery that night, Mr. Drebber.
And is that supposed to be significant?
This kind of camera is rarely seen in our homeland, so my colleague and I were keen to examine it closely. We noticed that the lens extends forward on the end of some bellows. Like this.
Hold it!
What's that? There, just on the bellows. It looks like a dark red stain.
That's right. It's a rather conspicuous mark here on the bellows, in fact.
Good lord, are you suggesting...
Yes, my lord. It would appear to be a spatter of blood. Something that could be confirmed with a simple chemical test. Isn't that right, Dr. Sithe? It would be difficult to determine if it was human blood and not the blood of some animal. But yes, to test whether or not it's blood at all is simple enough. I propose that Madame Tuspel's testimony was correct, and that on the night in question 10 years ago, you were spattered with blood from the gunshot wound.
Well,
And that furthermore, you really did witness the condemned professor emerging from his tomb. There's simply no way you could have forgotten such a traumatic experience. In other words, the only explanation is that you're trying to hide the fact that you saw the professor that night.
Objection!
but why? Why would he want to do that?
Well, not for his own gain, it would seem.
For whose then? Who could benefit?
Mr. Drebber is obviously lying in order to protect somebody.
My goodness, he's shielding someone.
Yes, my lord, and clearly, it's someone who doesn't want the truth about the professor coming back to life to be exposed.
Well, Counsel, who is it then? Who is this witness trying to protect by lying about what he saw that night?
Seriously?
Take that!
The obvious answer is Dr. Sithe.
Scythe? What? Whatever do you mean?
Imagine if the convict who had been sentenced to death was not in fact killed. Imagine if that was to come to light. What are you insinuating? And imagine if the convict in question was the country's most hated mass murderer. If it was the professor.
That would be an unprecedented scandal.
Objection!
This is beyond a joke. Need I point out that the dead cannot come back to life? What Yoshi's essay would mean that the execution never actually happened.
Yes, that's exactly what it would mean.
Objection!
Once a man is sent to the gallows, he hangs. No one could escape. Not in Great Britain.
Objection!
But the fact is, there was a witness to the fact that the man did escape his hanging.
If that were really true, Counsel, the implications of misconduct would not stop at the supervising coroner. It would taint the honor of the entire judiciary from the ground up.
And it's exactly because of those monumental repercussions that Dr. Sithe would consent to any demand made of her by someone who threatened to expose the secret, even if that meant being complicit in a crime.
You mean...
I mean that Dr. Sithe wasn't collaborating with Mr. Drebber's wicked scheme. She was coerced into collaborating in order to protect her decade-old secret. She switched the dead body of Mr. Asmund with the waxwork. Let me try that again. Deep breath, and she switched the... Okay, take it slow, take it slow. She switched the dead body of Mr. Asmund with the waxwork model and fabricated the autopsy report. There we go. Lord Van Zeeks?
Pray forgive my freshly filled hollow chalice and a whole raft of other discourtesies now. Goodness me! It's just the sort of tall tale Londoners would enjoy, I grant you. An executed killer rising from the dead, a Scotland Yard cover-up, a conspiracy at the highest levels. So let me ask you one thing.
What's that?
If the condemned man really did emerge from his tomb that night only to be shot in the chest, who pulled the trigger? And disposed of him forever?
Well, I have no idea at the moment. We have too little information to work that out at present, I think. I couldn't agree more.
The Old Bailey is no place for wild fantasies. And have you considered this, my learned Nipponese friend?
Consider what?
Do you realize just what a dangerous endeavor it would be to coerce this woman into such criminal activity? It's tantamount to declaring war on the entire British police force and judiciary. Quite. How to imagine any sum of money being offered for research could warrant it.
To rely on some stage deception when so much is at stake would be madness. Well, I suppose...
And this was no petty crime either. The victim was murdered. A man who'd already invested money in the venture and would be instrumental in future profits too.
Yes, I had no reason to kill Mr. Asman at all. Or are you forgetting that his death results in me receiving not a single penny? Does it? The court is already aware of the contract between myself and the victim, no?
There is the contract, that is very true. The motive for this case runs deep, though. I can feel it. Using threats to force the head of the forensic investigation team to cooperate is extreme, especially for a government grant he had no guarantee of receiving in the first place. If the research grant was the aim, taking Mr. Asman's life would have made no sense anyway. Which means Mr. Drebber's motive wasn't money at all. He was just trying to kill Mr. Asman. But why? What was his motive then?
Your time is up, my learned friend. I'd say you have one last chance before the jury lose their patience with the charade. Let's see if you can back up your heady proposal, shall we? How do you explain why this engineer would throw all the caution to the wind and threaten his own country?
At this point, I am not prepared to listen to more of this outlandish conjecture without proof. So, Counsel, present your evidence. Alright, who exactly was Mr. Asman to Drebber? There is a connection there that no one's seen yet, and I'm gonna have to present 2 pieces of evidence to show what it is. Yes, my lord. The evidence that establishes the motive and explains why the witness wanted the victim dead is right here.
Take that!
It's this newspaper article, my lord.
That was written 10 years ago, and every detail has been examined already. What can it possibly tell us?
That drivel should never have been written. It's typical gutter press nonsense. That means nothing.
Yes, on its own, it isn't particularly significant. However, when considered alongside another piece of evidence, it will completely explain your motive for wanting Mr. Asman dead.
What other evidence?
Counsel, you will present your supplementary evidence without delay. The evidence, which, when cross-referenced with the newspaper article, establishes a motive for the deed.
Take that!
It's this contract, my lord. Mr. Drebber, this is the contract you signed with Mr. Asman.
Yes, that's right. The very document, in fact. That proves I had no reason to kill the man.
Haha, no, I'm afraid not.
What?
There is something very significant that this newspaper article and the contract have in common.
Really?
And it's that common link that shows us very clearly why you were determined to kill Mr. Odie Asman.
It seems the defense has uncovered something the rest of us have missed. So, my learned friend, point out what these two pieces of evidence have in common. Where exactly is the link between this newspaper article and the contract?
Yeah, sure. It's right here. What these two pieces of evidence have in common is a signature.
A signature?
The signature on the illustration that accompanies the 10-year-old article and the signature on the contract belong to the same person.
What?
As the court has heard, this illustration was drawn 10 years ago by the newspaper reporter who found Mr. Drebber and interviewed him about his ordeal. If you look closely, the reporter's signature can be seen in the bottom right corner of the drawing. And if you look at the contract here, which was signed between the witness and the victim last year, you can clearly see Mr. Asman's signature at the bottom.
Let me see now. Good Lord, yes, they're identical.
In short, the journalist who drew the illustration and wrote the article published about Mr. Drebber 10 years ago was the victim of this case, Mr. Odie Asman.
Objection.
But explains to the court why. Why would that constitute a motive for the witness to murder Asman?
Well, if you think back, you'll remember that Mr. Drebber talked about that article in his testimony.
Grave robbing, you say?
Yes, exhuming fresh corpses to sell is reasonably lucrative.
That is quite beyond the pale. You would invite divine retribution, sir.
Yes, well, I think I severed retribution enough. The Daily Circus eventually unearthed my name and put it in print. It caused me a great many headaches. In the end, I had to leave the university. That was the only paper with the bad grace to identify me unambiguously, I might add. Then I gave up on my dream of becoming a scientist, and it was all because of that newspaper article.
At the time, you were a student of the University of London who dreamt of becoming a scientist. However, this single newspaper article changed your entire life.
So Mr. Asman used to be a newspaper journalist, did he? He did, my lord. In fact, it's a widely held belief that Mr. Asman managed to position himself at the heart of his criminal network, thanks to the many dubious connections he made during his time as a reporter.
So you had to give up on your dream and leave university. You lost everything. Eventually, you found yourself working in the field of science, but only in the shadows. And all because of that article, written by Mr. Asman.
Enough! Stop this industry will bite my life.
What? Explain yourself, Mr. Drebber.
Yes, it's true. I had to leave the university as a result of that article. But it was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
What do you mean?
Almost every student of science in the faculty was too poor to actually conduct any research. But they struggled on with that hypothesis anyway. We all did, only to have them taken by vultures. Sooner or later, you knew your ideas would be stolen and patented by some wretch or other after all.
Good gracious.
Making a name for yourself as a scientist in a climate like that was a miracle only a select few geniuses could ever hope to achieve. Personally, I wasn't one of those geniuses, so it was hardly a wrench. Being forced out of the university because of Lowgate was the best thing that could have happened to me.
Mr. Drebber, Do you genuinely believe that?
Of course I do. Who's better placed to know whether or not I possess a talent for science than me?
I'm sorry to say that your words don't ring true at all.
How dare you?
And I have evidence to prove it.
How are you in a position to say anything about me? I don't know you from Adam. Fine, if you think you have evidence, go ahead, share it. What could you possibly have to disprove the idea that I was happy to leave the university because I lack talent?
Take that!
Do you remember this, Mr. Jabber? We found it at your workshop.
Is that a Royal Society trophy for excellence in science?
What exactly is this trophy, Council? It's the greatest honor that can be bestowed on a young scientist, my lord.
There's no higher accolade. It recognizes emerging talent and promises a bright future.
Good gracious. Your prospects for the future were excellent, weren't they, Mr. Jabber? Because even then you were a genius in your field. But you lost everything. You had no more future. Your talents would go to waste. All as a result of this one newspaper article. I don't know when you realized who Mr. Asman was, but when it dawned on you that he was the same journalist who 10 years ago ruined your life, it's abundantly clear that you had no intention of forgiving the man.
The truth is...
Finally, he's gonna fold.
What? Huh. Fine. Clearly this has run its course now.
What?
I admit it. All of it. What?
What are you doing?
It's exactly as the Japanese man said. I was coerced into going along with this man's plot to murder the victim, on the condition that he kept my dirty secret from 10 years ago.
No. Good Lord! Dr. Size, do you realize what you're saying, woman?
It's all true. That day, when I arrived at the Crystal Tower and saw the birdcage, my heart nearly stopped beating. That memory from a decade ago that I'd done my best to bury deep inside myself. It was the professor again, staring me in the face. And then, before I had a chance to react, I noticed something else. There was a note tucked inside the model's jacket. Dr. Scythe, you will go along with my plan. From someone who knows the truth about what really happened that night 10 years ago. All the instructions were there in the note. Every detail was meticulously written out. I had no choice but to do what it said. I made the necessary alterations to the scene and fabricated the autopsy report as instructed. There was really no other choice. It had to be done to protect the judiciary. I can only apologize now.
Why on earth would you buckle now?
Well, there's no point in trying to hide it anymore, is there? I would have done anything to stop it coming out, even collaborate in a murder. But the great lie about that execution 10 years ago has been exposed. Whatever happens, I am finished. So then, Mr. Drebber, what do you say to that? Your accomplice has admitted everything.
Surely it goes without saying.
You admit your part in it too, then?
I admit nothing at all.
What?
Have you forgotten that the kinesis machine was ripped to shreds by an explosive? Short of me admitting to a crime, there's really no possible way for you to prove I did anything wrong.
No! Order! 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 Whatever this man says, I admit everything. He's certain to expose my secret, so I went along with his plan. And Lord Van Zeeks,
Yes?
I hope you'll accept my apologies. What happens next is in your hands, of course. I've heard more than enough now. I hereby present the final findings of this court. This trial is not the proper form in which to pursue the alleged wrongdoings of Mr. Drebber. The defendant is Professor Albert Harebrain.
Very true. It had slipped my mind.
Isn't he one of your closest friends? As the court has heard, Dr. Sithe has admitted to the allegations brought by the defense, thereby absolving the defendant of any possible guilt. You mean... At the present time, it is the conclusion of this court that the defendant was not involved in any wrongdoing. Does the prosecution have any objection?
None, my lord.
Oh, congratulations, Mr. Naruhodo. You've proven you have proven Professor Harebrain's innocence. Without further ado, then, the education. Unless the prosecution or defense have any other matters to discuss. I don't know. This doesn't feel quite right. Why did Dr. Sithe suddenly admit to it like that?
Is everything alright, Mr. Naruhodo?
Like you said before, the way the trial is set to end now, the judge will certainly deliver a verdict of not guilty. But is that really what we want? What the defense should be pushing for now is the truth.
Objection!
The defense objects to the trial ending at this time, my lord. I beg your pardon? We demand one final testimony. What? You do realize I'm about to educate in favor of your client, I presume?
What are you playing at now, my Nipponese friend? Why would you want to obstruct the conclusion of this trial at this point? No defense lawyer in his right mind would do that.
Mr. Naruhodo, what exactly are you thinking?
The truth, the whole truth, and a way to bring it all out into the open.
Right.
Yes, in hindsight. Yes, one word of warning before I go. If, in the course of the trial this afternoon, you perceive even a shadow of doubt about the truth, don't let it out of your sight. Pursue it like a dog with a bone. To the bitter end, you understand? Do not falter, whatever may come to pass. That's right, to the bitter end. I'm sure Mr. Sholmes knew. He must have deduced that this would happen. Yes, I'm here in court to advocate for my client, and to secure an acquittal.
Obviously.
But that's not all. I believe that I have a duty to the court to pursue the whole truth of the case until every last detail is laid bare. And that is why the defense calls for further testimony from Dr. Sithe. Testimony from me? About what? About the nature of your collaboration with Mr. Enoch Drebber. In case it escaped your attention, I have already admitted to everything I did. The whole truth has already been revealed. So stop wasting everyone's time. As his lordship made very plain, your client will get the acquittal you wanted for him. There's simply no point protracting this business further with another tedious cross-examination.
Objection!
Pray forgive my careless handling of that hallowed chalice. Hallowed bottle. I slipped.
That's what you call it?
What is your objection, Lord Van Zieks?
The prosecution also calls for supplementary testimony from the witness.
Don't be stupid.
If there's more to this case than has yet to come to light, then I will join my learned friend in pursuing the facts until the bitter end.
You're what? Lord Van Zieks.
This is most irregular, to say the least. However, as the prosecution also calls for it, I will uphold to the request. Dr. Sithe, you will testify for the court, explaining the full extent of your involvement in the murder apparently committed by Mr. Drebber.
Very well. What if Drebber didn't do it at all? What if this all has been Sithe's plan? Or what if it was the professor? What if the professor is still alive? She didn't see the waxwork of the professor, she saw the professor. It all began as a scene when I saw the waxwork and the note tucked inside its jacket. The actual body of the victim, as indicated in the note's instructions, was beneath the experimentation stage. The body had to be arranged in certain ways to implicate the defendant, which was my job. I enlisted the help of the entire forensic investigation team to dress the scene appropriately. The truth about the execution 10 years ago is a state secret of the highest level. I had to protect it. So I was right. The stage and the machine were all specially designed for the deception. So it seems, and all meticulously prepared. You did well to see through it. You're a very shrewd boy.
So kind of you to say.
And what about this autopsy report then? All I did was record the location of the body as being in the Crystal Tower instead of under the stage. That is all? That is a terrible corruption. Only my team were aware of the deceit, and then only under my explicit instructions. Nobody else at Scotland Yard knew anything about it, I assure you.
We must be thankful for small mercies, I suppose. Well, I believe that testimony has clarified everything. There is no particular need for a cross-examination, I would say.
No, I disagree. I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. Just look at that expression on Dr. Sithe's face. It's the defense's right to cross-examine any witness following the testimony. What is it about you Japanese that makes you all so doggedly persistent?
Very well. If you desire, counsel, proceed with the cross-examination.
Yes, my lord. I'll be right back.